39-year-old Lauren Stanton confessed to her neighbor that she was pregnant with her own 15-year-old son's child, and a few hours later, her entire family was dead. The day that ended in a series of murders and suicide in the quiet suburb of Clarksville, Tennessee, began deceptively normal. Neighbors later recalled that the morning at the Stanton home was no different from hundreds of others. 42-year-old Patrick Stanton, Lauren's husband, was mowing the lawn in front of their neat two-story house on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Their children, 8-year-old Emily and 6-year-old Jacob, played in the yard, their laughter mingling with the hum of the lawnmower. Their eldest son, Daniel, a quiet teenager with a passion for video games, helped his father collect the clippings into bags. From the outside, they looked like the perfect American family, the embodiment of the dream of stability and prosperity that is so cherished in the southern states. Nothing in their behavior foreshadowed the impending disaster that would forever tarnish their home with a grim reputation and become one of the most sinister and inexplicable tragedies in the state's history. Lauren, according to those who saw her that morning, seemed distant, but many attributed this to ordinary fatigue. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and her shifts were often long and exhausting. That day, she left the house around noon to pick up the mail. It was then that she had a brief but fateful conversation with her neighbor, Jennifer Ross. Jennifer was watering the flowers on her porch and asked Lauren how she was doing in a friendly manner. The answer was not what she expected to hear. Instead of the usual small talk about the weather or children, Lauren, according to Jennifer, approached her and quietly, almost emotionlessly, uttered a phrase that made the woman's blood run cold. "I'm carrying Daniel's baby." Jennifer Ross said in a later interview with News Channel 5 Network that at that moment, she didn't know how to react. She thought it was some cruel, inappropriate joke, or perhaps a symptom of deep stress. She tried to change the subject, but Lauren just stared at her with a blank, distant look. A moment later, she turned around and silently walked back into the house, leaving her neighbor completely baffled and alarmed. Jennifer spent several more hours wondering whether she should do something, call someone, perhaps Lauren's husband. But she hesitated, afraid of appearing crazy or interfering in someone else's family affairs, which could turn out to be much more complicated than they seemed at first glance. This hesitation, as she would later tell investigators, would haunt her for the rest of her life. Inside the Stanton home, the tension was mounting, but it remained hidden from prying eyes. According to data recovered by the police from his cell phone, Patrick Stanton searched the internet several times that day for information about the symptoms of female depression and postpartum psychosis. He had obviously noticed strange behavior in his wife, but probably could not have guessed the true cause of her condition. He was known in his circle as a devoted family man, an engineer at a local construction company, a thorough and calm person. He loved his family, and by all accounts, tried to find a rational explanation for what was happening until the very last moment. The fateful moment came closer to evening. Around 6 o'clock in the evening, Patrick was cleaning the bathroom on the second floor. In the trash can, under a pile of tissues, he found a positive pregnancy test. This discovery, apparently, was the last straw for him. It turned his vague suspicions into a terrifying certainty that something terrible and unnatural was happening in his family. He didn't make a scene. His first reaction was to seek outside help. At 6:14 p.m., he called 911. The recording of his call, later released by the Clarksville Police Department, lasted only 58 seconds. Still, it conveyed the despair and fear he was trying to hide behind a calm exterior. He gave the dispatcher his name and address. When asked why he was calling, he hesitated, his voice trembling. "My wife. She's not herself. I think she needs help. Urgently," he said. The dispatcher tried to clarify whether she had a weapon and whether she posed an immediate threat to herself or others. Patrick replied, "No weapons, but "I found something. Please send someone. I'm afraid for the children." In the background of the recording, a woman's voice could be heard, quiet but insistent, demanding that he hang up. It was Lauren's voice. "Who are you talking to, Pat?" "Put the phone down," she said. Patrick's last words on the recording were, "She's here. Hurry." Then the call ended. A patrol car was dispatched to the address immediately, with a standard arrival time in the area of 6 to 8 minutes. But those minutes felt like an eternity to the Stanton family. What happened at 42 Willow Creek Drive, in the short time it took for the police to arrive, will be analyzed by forensic scientists and psychologists for years to come, as they try to understand how a seemingly ordinary woman could turn into a cold-blooded killer of her own family. Lauren didn't give her husband a chance. According to the forensic examination, she attacked him immediately after he finished talking to the dispatcher. The struggle was brief. Patrick, being a physically strong man, probably did not expect such fury from his wife, and was not prepared to defend himself with full force. She used a regular vacuum cleaner extension cord as a weapon. The marks on his neck indicated that death was caused by strangulation. His body was found in the second-floor hallway, not far from the bathroom where he had made his terrible discovery. After killing her husband, Lauren went downstairs to the living room, where her younger children were watching cartoons. Emily and Jacob were unable to resist. Their small bodies were found on the sofa. The examination showed that they had also been strangled. There were no signs of terror on their faces, which led investigators to believe that they trusted their mother until the very last moment and did not understand what was happening. The last and perhaps most painful victim for Lauren was her eldest son, Daniel. His body was found in his own room on the second floor. He was lying on his bed, and unlike the others, there were signs of a struggle on his body, scratches on his arms and face. The 15-year-old probably tried to defend himself, but was unable to resist his crazed mother. She suffocated him with a pillow, putting all her remaining determination into the act. The motives that drove her to take this final step will forever remain a matter of debate. Was it revenge for him becoming the unwitting catalyst for the tragedy, or a twisted attempt to take him with her, so as not to leave him in a world where their secret had been revealed? Having completed her bloody rampage, Lauren walked through the house, which was filled with a deathly silence, and went out to the garage. There she wrote a short but chilling note on a piece of paper torn from a school notebook. A few uneven, hastily written words that were to be her last words and explanation. Then she took a rope, threw it over a ceiling beam, and made a noose. When the first patrol officer, David Harrison, arrived at the scene at 6:22 p.m., he found the house immersed in an eerie silence. The front door was unlocked. He entered, following protocol, and what he saw made him, a veteran police officer with 15 years of experience, shudder. The scene before him was so horrific that his first reports over the radio were disjointed and full of shock. One of the most high-profile and tragic investigations in the history of Tennessee criminalistics was beginning. Officer David Harrison, upon entering the house, immediately called for backup and an ambulance, although his instincts told him that the medics would be powerless here. Protocol required him to secure the perimeter and not touch anything until the detectives and forensic experts arrived. But the shock of what he saw caused him to freeze in the middle of the living room for a few seconds. The TV was still on, the bright colors of a children's cartoon flashing across the screen, but the sound was off. This silent animation against a backdrop of absolute, unnatural silence created a surreal and eerie atmosphere. Soon, dozens of police cars converged on Willow Creek Drive, their flashing blue and red lights cutting through the thickening October twilight and casting nervous glints on the facades of neighboring houses. The street was quickly cordoned off with yellow tape, keeping away onlookers and the first reporters to arrive on the scene. The investigation was assigned to Detective Michael Corbett, an experienced member of the Clarksville Police Department's Homicide Division. a man who had seen a lot of brutality in his 20-year career. But even he was not prepared for what awaited him inside house number 42. Upon entering the house, Corbett and his team began a methodical search of the premises. Every step taken by the forensic experts was measured and precise, every object photographed and described. On the first floor, in the living room, the bodies of Emily and Jacob Stanton were found. They were lying on the sofa, neatly covered with a blanket, as if asleep. On the second floor, in the hallway, was the body of their father, Patrick. Next to him on the floor lay a vacuum cleaner cord. Daniel was found in his bedroom, on his bed. There were a few signs of a struggle in his room, but they clearly indicated that, unlike the others, he was aware of what was happening and tried to resist. The last discovery was made in the garage adjacent to the house. Lauren Stanton's body was hanging from the ceiling. An overturned plastic toolbox stood beneath her feet. On the workbench, next to scattered nails and screwdrivers, lay a neatly folded piece of paper. It was a suicide note. Detective Corbett put on gloves and carefully picked it up. The handwritten words were short, but their meaning was monstrous in its simplicity and twisted logic. 5 words, written in uneven handwriting. "He was my real husband." The note left no doubt as to who was responsible for the carnage. What at first glance might have seemed a complex case of murder, followed by suicide, committed by an unknown perpetrator, instantly took on a clear and terrifying direction. The killer was the mother. The woman who was supposed to protect her children had become their executioner. But the main question remained unanswered. Why? What could have caused a 39-year-old nurse, described by everyone as a loving mother and wife, to destroy her entire family cold-bloodedly? The answer to this question began to emerge when investigators began questioning neighbors. The name Jennifer Ross came up almost immediately. She approached the police cordon herself and, seeing Detective Corbett, said she had something important to report. Her testimony was key to understanding Lauren's motives. As she recounted her morning conversation with Lauren, Jennifer cried. She repeated over and over that she should have done something, called Patrick or the police. Detective Corbett assured her that she could not have foreseen such an outcome. Lauren's confession that she was pregnant with her own son was so wild and unthinkable that anyone in Jennifer's place would have considered it delusional or a bad joke. Now those words took on a sinister meaning and became the starting point for understanding the whole chain of events. Investigators immediately requested a warrant for a detailed search of the house and access to the medical records of all family members, as well as their electronic devices. A forensic examination of the bodies was scheduled for the next morning. A preliminary examination of the bodies by the coroner at the scene confirmed that all 4, Patrick, Daniel, Emily, and Jacob, had died as a result of asphyxiation caused by suffocation. The time of death was estimated to be between 6 and 7 o'clock in the evening. The autopsy of Lauren Stanton's body was supposed to provide a definitive answer to the most important question: was she really pregnant? And if so, who was the father of the child? While forensic scientists worked in the house, analysts began to study the family's digital footprints. Daniel's computer and Lauren and Patrick's cell phones were seized for examination. The first results of the analysis of Patrick's phone browser history confirmed that he had been actively searching for information about mental disorders in recent days. This indicated that he was aware of his wife's problems, but did not know their true nature. An examination of Lauren's social media accounts and personal correspondence did not yield any immediate results. Her accounts were full of photos of a happy family, birthdays, vacations at the beach, school holidays. She created the image of a perfect mother, and nothing hinted at the abyss that lay behind this facade. At the same time, a deeper analysis showed that her online activity had significantly decreased over the past year. She stopped posting photos and communicating with friends, as if withdrawing into herself. This detail, which had previously seemed insignificant, now looked like a warning sign. Detectives also began to investigate Lauren and Patrick's past, their relationship, and possible conflicts. They had been married for 17 years and seemed like a stable couple. However, interviews with Lauren's colleagues at the hospital revealed some oddities in her behavior in recent months. She had become more withdrawn, often looking tired and distracted. Some attributed this to professional burnout, while others suspected family problems. One of the nurses recalled that Lauren had complained several times about her husband's lack of understanding and how quickly the children were growing up, especially Daniel. In the context of the tragedy, these fragmentary phrases took on a new, ominous tone. News of the tragedy on Willow Creek Drive quickly spread throughout Clarksville and then across the country. Journalists besieged the police department, demanding comments. Police Chief Adam Greenberg was forced to hold a brief press briefing, at which he confirmed the deaths of 5 people and said that investigators were considering the possibility of murder followed by suicide. He refrained from disclosing details, especially regarding the motives and contents of the suicide note, so as not to interfere with the investigation and out of respect for the relatives of the deceased. But information about Lauren's shocking confession to her neighbor had already leaked to the press through anonymous sources, and this detail turned the tragedy into a national sensation. The story of a mother who became pregnant by her son and destroyed her family became the main topic of news broadcasts and talk shows. Psychologists and criminologists across the country tried to explain what had happened, talking about rare forms of mental disorders, possible psychosis, and the complex guilt and shame that could have driven the woman to such a monstrous act. But for Detective Corbett and his team, all these theoretical arguments were just background noise. Their task was to gather facts, reconstruct the crime, and compile a complete and objective report. They had to look into the darkest corners of the Stanton family's life to understand how, step by step, their American dream had turned into a nightmare. Ahead of them lay autopsy results, data from electronic devices, and dozens of interviews, each of which could shed light on this unthinkable tragedy. The investigation was beginning. The next day, Tuesday, October 23rd, the preliminary results of the forensic examination arrived on Detective Corbett's desk, confirming the investigation's worst fears. The report, compiled by Dr. Alan Fairchild, Chief Medical Examiner for Montgomery County, was written in dry technical language, but behind every term lay a human tragedy. The autopsy of Lauren Stanton's body confirmed that she was indeed pregnant. She was approximately 10 to 12 weeks along. DNA samples from the fetus were immediately sent to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's Forensic Laboratory in Nashville for urgent analysis and comparison with the DNA of Daniel and Patrick Stanton. Although the official conclusion on paternity would take several days, the investigation did not doubt the outcome. This fact moved the case from the category of inexplicable family tragedies to the category of events beyond human understanding. The motive, which had previously seemed like the ravings of a madwoman, was gaining a terrifying factual basis. At the same time, the IT team presented its first report on the analysis of the seized electronic devices. It was here, in the cold digital reality, that a picture began to emerge of the toxic and isolated environment that had formed within the Stanton home long before the tragedy. Daniel's computer hard drive was the source of the most shocking discoveries. Daniel was a quiet and withdrawn teenager, and his online life was his only way of communicating with the world. However, investigators found no traces of typical teenage interests there. Instead, his search history for the past 6 months was full of despair and fear. He searched for information on forums such as Reddit and Quora, asking anonymous questions that made experienced detectives' blood run cold. What to do if your parent is abusing you? How to leave home if you are under 18? Can you sue your own mother for abuse? An analysis of his deleted messenger correspondence showed that he tried to tell one of his online video game friends about his situation. but the friend apparently didn't believe him, thinking his stories were made up or trolling. Daniel wrote about his mother's total control, how she monitored his every move, read his messages, and isolated him from his peers. He described her behavior as increasingly strange and intrusive, complaining that she treated him not as a son, but as a partner. These messages were filled with shame and hopelessness. He found himself trapped, unable to seek help, afraid of publicity, and not believing that anyone would help him. Lauren's computer, in turn, revealed the other side of this pathological relationship. Her search history was filled with queries about Jocasta syndrome, a term used in psychology to describe a mother's unconscious incestuous attraction to her son. She read articles about psychological dependence, manipulation in relationships, and how to keep your son's love forever. Drafts of unsent emails addressed to Daniel were found in her inbox. They were long, rambling texts full of declarations of love, jealousy of his potential future girlfriends, and a panic-stricken fear that one day he would grow up and leave her. In one such email, dated early September, she wrote, "You are the only thing that matters. Everyone else is just a shadow. You and I are connected in a way that no one else ever will be. I won't let anyone destroy that." These digital artifacts painted a portrait of a woman obsessed with her own son, a woman who saw him not as a child, but as a replacement for the whole world, including her own husband. Patrick Stanton, in this picture, looked like a man who remained in the dark until the very end. His phone contained nothing that would indicate any suspicion about the true nature of the relationship between his wife and eldest son. His search queries about his wife's depression showed that he saw the problem, but misinterpreted it. He tried to find a solution within the framework of normal family logic, unaware that the reality in his home had long since gone beyond the norm. The investigation also focused on examining the family's social environment. Detectives talked to teachers at the children's school. Daniel's teachers described him as a capable but extremely withdrawn student. He never participated in extracurricular activities and had virtually no friends. The school psychologist tried to talk to him several times, concerned about his social isolation, but Daniel always replied that everything was fine. The teachers of the younger children, Emily and Jacob, did not notice anything unusual. They were normal, cheerful children. However, upon further questioning, one of Emily's teachers recalled an incident when the girl drew a picture of her family in art class. In the drawing, everyone was holding hands, but the figures of the mother and older brother were surrounded by a large red heart, while the father and younger brother stood slightly apart. At the time, no one thought much of it, but now this childish drawing seemed like a chilling symbol of a broken family structure. Interviews with the few relatives, mainly Patrick and Lauren's cousins, did not clarify the situation either. They described the Stantons as a closed family who did not like to let outsiders into their lives. Lauren, they said, had always been a little strange, prone to drama and excessive control, but no one could have imagined that it would lead to something like this. They confirmed that in recent years, Lauren had minimized contact with her relatives, always finding reasons not to attend family gatherings. She had created an impenetrable cocoon around her family, inside which this hidden drama unfolded. With each new piece of information, Detective Corbett saw an increasingly clear and at the same time increasingly monstrous picture emerge. This was not a sudden fit of madness. The tragedy of October 21st was the culmination of years of psychological abuse and manipulation. Lauren Stanton methodically isolated her son from the outside world, building a pathological bond with him that she probably considered the highest form of love. The pregnancy became the point of no return. It was tangible proof of their secret, impossible to hide. When Patrick found the test, Lauren's world collapsed. Exposure was inevitable. And then, in her distorted mind, the only way out was to destroy all the witnesses and herself. She decided to take her entire family with her to seal her secret forever. leaving no one behind who could tell the story. But she miscalculated. She left behind a neighbor to whom she had whispered her secret, and digital traces that told the story better than any words could. On Friday, October 26th, investigators received the official report from the crime lab in Nashville. The DNA analysis results left no doubt. With a probability of 99.9%, the father of Lauren Stanton's unborn child was her 15-year-old son, Daniel. This paper, filled with scientific terms and genetic markers, became the official epitaph for the Stanton family, documentary proof of the secret that led to their demise. For Detective Corbett and his team, the investigation had now entered a new phase. The facts of the case were clear. Lauren Stanton, pregnant with her son, had killed him, her husband, and her 2 younger children, then taken her own life. Now the main task was to compile a so-called psychological autopsy, an attempt to reconstruct Lauren's thought processes and motives to understand how the human psyche could reach such a degree of destruction. Dr. Elias Vance, a renowned forensic psychologist from Vanderbilt University specializing in family murders, was brought in to assist with the investigation. After reviewing the case files, crime scene reports, autopsy results, digital evidence, and witness statements, Dr. Vance concluded that Lauren Stanton most likely had severe borderline personality disorder with pronounced narcissistic and sociopathic traits. In his report to the police, he wrote that Lauren no longer saw her son, Daniel, as a separate person. In her mind, he had become a narcissistic extension of herself, an object that should belong entirely to her and satisfy her emotional needs. Her husband, Patrick, and younger children, according to Vance, played the role of props in her life, elements of the facade of the perfect family that she built for the outside world. But the real center of her universe was Daniel. This pathological process, according to the psychologist's assessment, developed over many years. Lauren systematically isolated her son, suppressing his attempts to make friends or pursue interests outside the home. She created a world in which only the 2 of them existed, and in that world, she was the absolute center. Any attempt by Daniel to show independence was perceived by her as betrayal and led to manipulation or emotional blackmail. Pregnancy, Vance believed, became for Lauren the perverse culmination of their relationship, the final and irrefutable proof that Daniel belonged to her. But at the same time, the pregnancy became a time bomb. A secret of this magnitude could not be kept forever. When Patrick found the test, the destruction mechanism was set in motion. For a narcissistic personality like the one Vance saw in Lauren, the prospect of public exposure and shame was tantamount to death. Her carefully constructed world was falling apart, and she could not allow that to happen. The murder of her family, according to the psychologist, was not an act of remorse or an attempt to save her children from disgrace. It was the final act of total control. By destroying her family, Lauren destroyed the witnesses to her failure. She took with her everything she considered her property, so that no one else could pass judgment on her life. The suicide note, "He was my real husband," was, according to Vance, not a declaration of love, but an assertion of ownership. It was her last desperate attempt to define reality on her own terms. To confirm or refute this theory, detectives delved into Lauren Stanton's past, trying to find the origins of her pathology. They traveled to the small town in Mississippi where she grew up. The picture of her childhood turned out to be bleak. Lauren was the only child in a family with a domineering, emotionally cold mother and a passive, weak-willed father. According to the few acquaintances of the family, her mother controlled her daughter's every move, demanded perfection from her, and punished her severely for any misdemeanors. Evidence was found that Lauren ran away from home several times as a teenager and was even arrested by the police once for petty theft. However, each time she was returned to her family, where apparently no psychological analysis of the situation was conducted. One of the family's former neighbors told investigators that Lauren's mother often spoke of her daughter with poorly concealed contempt, but at the same time was terrified that she would leave her. This relationship model, a mixture of adoration and control, love and hate, was reproduced with terrifying accuracy in the next generation, in Lauren's relationship with her own son. She became the person she feared and hated most, her mother. This information did not justify her actions, but it did shed light on the psychological mechanism that had been set in motion long before her marriage and the birth of her children. She was the product of a broken family, and in turn, created an even more monstrous version of this model. Other disturbing details emerged during the investigation. Patrick's colleague recalled how, a few months before the tragedy, Patrick had complained in a private conversation that Lauren was becoming unbearably jealous of Daniel. She would throw a fit if Patrick planned to spend time alone with his son, for example, going fishing or to a baseball game. At the time, it seemed strange, a manifestation of excessive maternal care. Now those words sounded like an ominous warning that no one could interpret correctly. The Stanton family tragedy also exposed a broader social problem. How could it be that in a seemingly close-knit suburban community, no one noticed the signs of trouble? Neighbors, teachers, colleagues, they all saw only the facade, the perfect picture that Lauren so carefully maintained. In their testimony, they expressed shock and bewilderment, but no one could recall anything that would have raised serious concerns. The Stanton family was polite, but reserved. They did not participate in neighborhood barbecues and rarely invited anyone over. Those around them perceived their isolation as modesty or self-sufficiency, rather than a warning sign. This story became a bitter lesson for the residents of Clarksville that the most terrible tragedies can unfold behind the closed doors of the most ordinary-looking houses. It made many people think about how well they knew their neighbors and whether they were missing quiet cries for help, drowned out by the noise of lawnmowers and children's laughter in the yard. The investigation was coming to its logical conclusion. The investigators had a complete picture of what had happened, backed up by physical evidence, digital traces, and psychological analysis. All that remained was to put it all together in a final report and close the case. That's all, friends. Write your opinion in the comments about what you think of this story. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and see you in new videos.